Welcome to season 13 of the Parenting Aces podcast, a proud member of the Tennis Channel Podcast Network. I'm your host, Lisa Stone, and this week we are joined by Coach Joey Blake. Joey has an incredible resume, both as a player and as a coach. He was a top junior in the U.S. after growing up in the Las Vegas area. He went on to play in college and on the professional circuit, and unfortunately suffered an injury that was career-ending for him as a player, but led him into his current role as coach, where he has coached some amazing players to high levels in both junior and college tennis and beyond. So Joey is joining us because I have been kind of toying with this notion of stats and all these incredible new apps and technology that's out there for us to keep track of stats, and wondering exactly what it is we're supposed to be doing with all of this information we're gathering. And so Joey is an expert in this arena. He is going to be sharing his thoughts about how to best use stats to help our junior players achieve their potential, how we can use these apps to help us as parents maintain our composure and our sanity when we're sitting at our kids' matches. And also, hopefully, for those of you who are coaches tuning in, it will give you a better understanding of what to do with all this data when a parent emails it to you or hands it over to you and says, okay, here, figure out how to use this to help my kid get better. So for now, sit back, relax, enjoy my conversation with Coach Joey Blake. Welcome to the podcast, Joey. It's so nice to have you. And I am really excited about our conversation today because this has been one that's been in the works for several months. And I'm just so glad we could finally make this happen.
I'm so happy to be here, and thank you so much for having me.
Well, you've got a lot of experience, not to imply anything other than you have a lot of experience and a lot of great insights, I think, to share with our audience. And so I think you're the perfect person to kind of tackle this topic. But before we dive in to the topic of stats and data and what to do with all this stuff, I would love for you to give our audience a little bit of your tennis story. How did you get started in the sport? What did you do in the sport before coaching? And what led you to where you are now?
Wow. Well, we got a long way to go on that one. So
I know, and all in 10 seconds or less. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, perfect. Well, I started playing tennis when I was 7 years old. I was following my father that was conducting for music. He was a former basketball player, just followed him to the local public tennis court, started in against the wall. One thing led to another. Had a gentleman that met with my father and sat there and said, I have a feeling that you need to have this person take a look at your son. I think there's something there. One thing led to another. I kept played my first tournament at 8 years old. Pretty much was ranked in the top 10 in the country in every age group, coming all the way up. I was very fortunate to have an incredible support cast around me, with my coach, to my father, my parents. I loved it. I mean, it was just one of those things that I fell in love with. I love basketball. I love hockey. I love so many other sports, but tennis being the individual sport, I just fell in love with. So make a very long story short, went through, played the juniors. By the time 15, 16 came around, really started to take it incredibly seriously, to the point where, you know what, there could be something here. And was fortunate enough to be a member of the U.S. National Davis Cup team for the juniors for 3 straight years.
Who were some of your teammates?
Oh, geez. I mean, Patrick McEnroe, Luke Jensen, Richie Rittenberg, Buff Farrow, Dan Naherney, Jay Berger. It's just, we start laughing because it's just like, oh, yeah, that's where we were one day. And, here we are today.
Yeah.
The very interesting thing about our group is so many of them became coaches.
Yeah.
It was just that era. It was just like, okay, it wasn't Andre, it wasn't Jim Courier, but that group just sort of all became either college coaches, coaches on the tour, something to do with tennis, which was awesome. I sort of found coaching because I always swore I was never going to coach. I just said there's zero probability of it. I don't want to do it. I had won the US Open Juniors in doubles, lost in the finals to singles, went to college, had a chance because at that time I was 3 or 4 in the world in the juniors, but I made a decision I wanted to go to school first to see how I would do against guys that were 4 and 5 years older than me. And that year with Coach Ron Hightower, which is the best man at my wedding, I owed so much to him. Basically, I won the won the NCAA Indoors as a freshman, and I was the first person to ever do that since John McEnroe. And then all of a sudden, my life changed. It was one of those things that I was playing. I went to the NCAAs, and at the NCAAs, all the agents, everybody's talking to you and saying, well, what are you going to do? Are you going to stay? Are you going to turn? And this is long before the one and done for college basketball and all that. And I was like, look, here's the deal. If I can at least reach the round of 16 in the singles, I'm probably going to turn. That means I got my All-American honors and so on. Well, I ended up getting to the semis. And I was playing Richie Rittenberg, who I had actually beat 4 days earlier in the team event. But then it got moved outdoors. And I was like, geez, could we just play indoors for this one? And ended up losing to him, but it was a close match. And I ended up being a member of the U.S. national team for the summer, and I still wasn't decided. I still hadn't decided. It's like, you know what, maybe I still will go back or so on. I had a pretty good summer, I mean, to say the least. And my coach at Arkansas, Ron Hightower, was also one of the U.S. national coaches. He was a former player on the tour, top 80 in the world. And I had a lot of guidance and a lot of people that were playing on the tour around me. So I made the decision to go play. And about a year and a half later, the worst thing that could ever happen to a player happened. Is basically my career was over. I mean, I blew my wrist out, blew every ligament out on a return to serve. Didn't really think about it. I kept trying to play through it. And tried to make a comeback. Then it's like, you know what, this isn't worth it. There's too much time lost. And I'll never forget this. I went to go see my mom in Washington, D.C. And my mom actually tells me that, well, if you're gonna, you're done with tennis, you're gonna need to find a job. And I was like, yes, I know. I mean, I didn't get my degree. I didn't, all these things happened. And I said, well, I just so happen to know some people in the tennis world. I'm going to talk with them here and see what happens. But I was still planning on going back to school. And I wanted to get my education. So there was a gentleman by the name of Bob Pass that had an academy at that time, was called 4-Star. And I called him up and I said, hey, I'm done with playing. I'm not sure if I'm going back, but pretty sure I won't be. But I want to go to school, but I would love to coach. He said, hey, why don't you just come by? I'm going to test you out and let's see what you can do. So I show up. He gives me a tryout, calls me that night. And he goes, well, I got good news and bad news. And I'm like, oh, boy. He goes, well, the good news is you have a job. And I said, so what's the bad news? He goes, well, the job I'm giving you, there's no chance you're going to be able to have time for school. And I was like, so what's this? And he goes, well, I'm going to put you in charge of like helping our top national juniors. So it sort of shows my age, but one of my very first students that was on the court is Paul Goldstein.
Oh, come on.
So I'm sitting there and I'm like going, and Paul's like 13, 14 years old. And there's a great story about the stats that we're going to get to.
And
like,
just for our audience, Paul is now the men's coach at Stanford.
yes. It shows my age. He's the men's coach, and my other player, Jamie Hunt, is the coach at Georgia.
At Georgia.
And I'm like, now I know I'm really getting old. But I was able to work with all the top national juniors from the Mid-Atlantic area. He gave me a great opportunity. Quite honestly, I really did not know what I was doing as a coach. I could still play. I could still do everything with them, hit with them, play them. And if needed be, I could beat them. But I learned so much from Bob. I mean, he was a mentor. I owe so much to him. I mean, he passed away a few years ago, but he set up this entirely incredible product in the Mid-Atlantic that was fantastic. And I fell in love with coaching. I just did. I mean, it was one of those things that it may have been a little bit too early for me, just because I just come off the tour, and then all of a sudden I'm thrown into this, and now I got to go travel to junior tournaments, to all these other things. I was like, wait, I just got off the tour. I just got through traveling. So it was a little bit overwhelming, but.
And what are you, like 20 at this point?
No, I was like 20, 22.
Okay.
I mean, it's between 21, 22, because it's just like, you know what, I don't have anything. I mean, this is it.
Yeah.
And I still was on the fence. I didn't know if I wanted to coach or if I was going to go back to school and get a degree to do something else. But I fell in love with the art of coaching. And so there was a lot of players that were still playing that I used to have wins over and beat. And it's like going, I used to beat all you guys. And, hey, Joe, you want to go to the US Open? Absolutely not. I don't want to go see any of these guys play. I used to beat them. But I learned a lot of how to deal with kids, players, how to manage certain things that I probably would have never done if I was still playing. Mm. And so as I always would tell a lot of guys that came off the tour and started coaching, I said, well, I already got about 10 years on you. I already know, like, you know, this is what you're going to have to start learning. This is how the mind ticks. This is, you know, you got to deal with the parents. This is always the fun thing. You got to figure out how to make this whole dynamic work, because it's not going to be just like, well, this is what I used to do. It's like, it doesn't work that way.
Yeah.
So that was it. I mean, and ever since then, I've been involved in it. I still have Joey Blake Tennis that I'm in Las Vegas. My wife and I moved here. I consult, work with clubs, academies, work with private individuals. I have pro players that I work with. And then I also have a foundation, Spin Master Foundation, a sports foundation, which is really to help the underprivileged kids to be able to find their sport, because I'm a sports fanatic and I'm a diehard. Anytime there's a sports event, I'll try to go. And it's really for the kids that can't afford to get soccer lessons, ice hockey lessons. If you want to be a figure skater, gymnast, whatever, we want to find, we call it the sports initiative, like what matches you. And then we want to give them pride in what they do, because there's no chance that they could have ever done anything in their life because they either don't have parents or, you know, they're just in a really bad place. But we want to say, look, you could actually do really well. And if it happens where you go through this program and then you get a college scholarship, and they might be the very first person to ever go to college, it's a win-win. Yeah. And, you know, it's my way of, you know, with some friends of mine, it's our way of giving back, because tennis isn't, you know, I didn't want to do just tennis, because tennis, everybody just does tennis, pickleball, whatever. I mean, that's great. I said, look, there's a whole bunch of athletes out there. If they fall in love with tennis, great. But I would rather touch all the kids where they can, you know, hey, but I love football. Well, let's see if we can help you. Or basketball or so on. So that's, you know, make a long story short, we're doing a whole bunch of things with the foundation, with my, you know, my tennis program, and have my grandkids, my wife. I'm very busy.
Yes, you are very busy. And just so our listeners know, we'll have links to all of the blah, blah, blah. It is late in the day. So sorry. We will have links to all of Joey's adventures in the show notes on parentingaces.com. So be sure and check those out, and you'll be able to click through and check out more detail about what he's up to. I want to hear the Paul Goldstein stats story.
So before Paul ever won a national event, we were at the Easter Bowl. And I still remember this like it was yesterday. It was just a stroke of luck because Bob Pass had asked me, he says, hey, could you go down to the Easter Bowl down at Doral? I'd love to have you down there. And since you won it back in those days, I would love for you to be down there and see if you can help some of our players. Well, Paul would happen to be one of the players. And so Paul was going through the event, but Paul at that time was, I want to say he was like the 5th or 6th seed. So there was guys, Scott Humphreys to all these other names that were, quite honestly, for the U.S. national team, they were their guys. Paul was sort of on the radar, but not quite there yet. And there's this statistic that I used to use called CompuTennis. Mm-hmm. And CompuTennis back in the day was all your stats that you could figure out. I mean, if you wanted to sit there and have a 50-page report, you could have it. If you wanted to have just like a glimpse, you could have it. But quite honestly, it was very truthful. And so how I got started with CompuTennis was my coach, Andy Durham. He just started a company called Racket Stats. That everybody
and I love that you're giving a plug to Racket Stats because they are one of our sponsors here at Parenting
I love
Aces.
it.
So,
all right.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, CompuTennis, Racket Stats is originally, it came from CompuTennis. And so I used to go down at 14, 15 years old and be one of the stat guys that would do the Miami Open. Well, they call it the Miami Open now, but it used to be called the Lipton. Mm-hmm. So when you would see Cliff Drysdale and all these guys doing it, I would be the person on the machine that would be charting the matches with Dr. Leo Levin or these guys, and they would come in, and it's like I knew how to work it. I loved it.
You're connecting so many dots for me right now. This is so funny. Leo is one of the first people I met when I started Parenting
so Leo,
Aces.
I used to stay with Leo. Wow. Leo used to be with Bill Jacobson. Bill Jacobson started CompuTennis. Leo became like the grandfather of like getting it on the mainstream on TV with IBM. Yeah. Leo and I had an amazing relationship. It was sort of like a secondary father to me that would just be around. So I used to go to tournaments and do that. He says, hey, I need help. This is a big tournament. It's like one of the bigger ones. I need you to go. I remember one of my very first matches was doing Steffi Graf's match at like age 13. Oh, I'm like, are you kidding me? And then I look back and I was like, oh my God, I remember that was at the old Rod Laver, at Delray, and they used to have the tournament there. And it's like, yep, I did Steffi's match. But I learned a lot from stats. Mm-hmm. And stats are not about trying to figure out how you're going to beat your opponent. I think everybody gets lost in that. And I've heard numerous commentators, friends of mine, guys that I used to play with on the tour is like, well, I don't believe in it. It's like, well, you actually do believe in it a little bit. I get what you're saying. And I think what happens is that coaches get a little bit intimidated by the stats. If your student's first serve percentage might not be at the number that you're trying to shoot for, they feel like, well, I'm not doing a good job. That's not what the stats are about. Mm-hmm. Stats are about progression, how to train, how to look at things, how to get your player involved into it to make sure that they have an ownership. Because a lot of times is that the coach just tells the kid, well, you got to do this. It's like, well, it doesn't really matter, to be honest with you. If the kid could go serve 45% and win 1-0, mm-hmm. I mean, they really could. So they could come back and say, well, I was doing this. So then you can go back and look at it and say, well, you did win 75% of the points on your first serve because you did this. I think that's what's lost. Mm-hmm. Everybody thinks they get all like freaked out from stats. They all look at it from a certain way of like, well, yeah, but their backhand passing shot's not that bad. It's like, I mean, they're winning 35%. It's not going to really be that good. How do we make it better? Do we hit it to a different direction? Do we teach you a topspin lob? Is there different things that I can implement in your game? And this is what I do with stats. I use it as a resource. So getting back to Paul, which is the funniest part, is that I remember with some of the national coaches, I won't sit there and say who they were. I remember about in the round of 16 quarters, and I said, well, you're going to have to take a look and look out for this guy. And they're like, yeah, I mean, he plays this certain way and he does that. And it's like, yeah, well, there's only one little problem is that he has the game to sit there and destroy exactly what you're talking about. So he played one of the guys, and I said, look, and I'll never forget this. I said, Paul, I'm just going to tell you this right now. Just use your returns. You have one of the fastest guys I've ever seen. Dip the first pass. I guarantee he's going to go short angle on the very first ball. Meaning that all you have to do is run and just hit the ball down the line. You won the point. He always goes drop volley. The guy sat there and told me with the national coaches, and they said, well, Joey, yeah. I said, it's going to be a good match. No, probably about 2 and 3. I said, I don't think so. Yeah, well, Paul, I think won like maybe 3 and 3 against the number 1 seed at that time. And it was crazy. I mean, it was one of those things that he was one of those guys that was so good at listening and like taking information. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if he even remembers it because it was so long ago, but it was just like, hey, you might want to just do this. And I just kept watching, and I remember looking at the coaches and I smiled, and I just like tried to tell you, I might only be like 22, 23 years old, but if he dips the first pass, he's going to win.
Yeah. That's
so
awesome.
It does help a lot. I mean, it's an opening. It helps things. But I think more importantly, statistics can help parents. I think it helps the parent-coach relationship more than anything in this world. I mean, coaches can sit there and we can talk till we're blue in the face of like, well, your kid needs to improve this and need to improve their balance. You got to hit a better forehand cross court. Their first serve percentage, or they need to win more points. It doesn't mean anything. At the end of the day, it really doesn't mean a darn thing, because unless the parent was truthfully a high-end player, they don't grasp that. And I don't expect them to grasp that. When they watch their kids play, they're so emotionally involved and invested in what their kid's doing that they're losing sight of what the progressions and the process is to make them a better player. They really are. I mean, they can try as hard as they want, but at the end of the day, they're feeling for their kid out there. They want them to succeed. They want them to be, oh my God, I can't believe they missed that forehand pass. And it's like, well, at least they went down the line. Last time they always went cross court. So it's a great tool to be able to use, because let's be honest, there's academies in the world, really good coaches that know what they're doing. They don't have enough time. There's no possible way that they can be watching every single player that they work with, nor can the parents afford to pay them. It's just too expensive.
Right.
But the greatest asset they have is that I try to explain to parents, it's like, look, learn this. Learn how to chart. Number one, it's going to make your life a heck of a lot easier. Because when you watch your child play, if you're charting, you're going to be able to be in depth in the match, and you're going to be focused on that rather than what the outcome always is. Mm-hmm. I think too many parents, they sit on their hands, knees, they're clapping, they're doing everything, cheering. It's not really going to do much, except probably make your kid a little bit more like, I'm scared. But if you're charting, you're actually going to take something from an 1.5 to 2 hour match. You have something that you can take to the coach and show them and say, these are the stats of the match. Mm-hmm. And then they can leave it very generic. I mean, it's like, hey, I thought my kid competed hard. I love their body language. they really did a good job of slowing down the pace and not rushing when they were in. You can pay attention to that when you are just completely watching the match. Trust me, you ain't focused on any of things. I could give you a note card and you're not going to look at one of those things. So stats are important, not because, hey, I'm going to figure out the stats how to beat you. Because at the end of the day, everybody knows what the stats are. I mean, another coach over here wants to use the stats. We're going to go, well, they're going to do this. So they're going to counteract what we do. We already know that. It's more of, how can I help you become a better player? And it doesn't matter if you want to be a nationally ranked going to college to pro, or if you want to go play high school tennis. Because truthfully, I would love to see this help high school coaches that don't really have a background in doing this to keep kids in our sport, because they could sit there and look at something and go, you know what, we got to work on your first serve percentage. Well, what's the easiest way to do that? Let's just get a bucket of balls out. Let's see if you can hit how many in a row. I'm not going to teach you technique. Just learn how to hit it in the box.
Yeah.
You know, you don't make enough returns. Great. I'm going to serve you a whole bunch of balls. Let's see if you can do it. And that's just for the, you know, the recreational high school. And we need to have more of those. Because if we could get more of those type of kids playing, I really believe that some of those are going to, hey, I really like this. And then they're going to transfer over to what we call, I saw one of your last episodes, high performance.
Yeah.
Because everybody says, oh, we're all high performance. No, you're not. This is a whole different story.
Yeah.
But statistics are part of it. And it's my way. When a kid comes back to me, and their parent can send me a text with a PDF of the stats, and I can look at it, and they're getting ready to play a match the very next day or in 2 hours, I can look at that and say, hey, this is what I just saw. Let's try to focus on these 2 areas or 3 areas to see if you can improve it in this match. That way it helps the kid. Because how many times is I tell the kids to call me, and I said, look, I make something very clear with me. Do not call me to tell me you won or lost. If you tell me and the first words out of your mouth is like, I won, great. That's not what I asked.
Yeah.
I want to know how the match went, how you felt, what you felt you did well, what you need to improve. Because junior tennis is a process. And if you want to go to the highest level, that win in the level 2 designated that you're playing really means absolutely nothing. Matter of fact, the loss may have helped you better if you would have done the things that you're supposed to do.
Right.
So I do think.
Can I interrupt you for 1 second? Because I want to, you've given us so much information. I want to unpack a little bit of that.
Sure.
And a couple things really jumped out at me. First of all, what jumped out is a coach looking at the data that comes from charting the match and understanding what they're looking at, and then giving very specific directives to the player for the next match. I think that's one of the places where things sometimes break down, is a coach may not understand how to actually look at the data and pull those nuggets out, because not all coaches are trained in this stuff, right? Not everybody understands it.
No, I don't. Yeah, I agree.
Okay, let me give you my second piece, and then we'll come back. My second piece is that when it's a coach like you who does understand what you're looking at with this data, and then you say to the kid, okay, in your next match, I want you to do this thing, and this thing. And the parent hears that, all of a sudden it gives the parent something to look at in that next match that, as you mentioned, has nothing to do with winning and losing, but rather is the kid doing what the coach is directing them to do in that match. And as the parent, that's what I can focus on and then report back at the end.
You're absolutely 100% correct. I mean, that's the more information coaches can help parents with, of giving them something to look at. I always feel that there's this, well, the parent shouldn't know. It's like, look, let's be honest. It's the parent. The parent needs to know. The parent is the one that drops them off. The parent's the one that sits there, has invested all this time, money,
and writes the
so on,
check.
and writes the check. And you can't sit there and keep them out of the loop.
Right.
What I want is I want their eyes. And I learned this at a very young age, from my father. And it's like, when you're a player, and my coach told me this too, he says, we think that we know what we're doing. But when you have two other sets of eyes that are sitting there and watching that, you got to start learning to trust that a little bit. And so when a parent says, hey, you weren't really getting down ready on the return to serve, you weren't bouncing around, you looked like you got a little bit flat-footed, I'm not there. I don't see that because I wasn't at that match. But at least if they're aware of that, because you say this is a tendency, when they get tight, these things happen, they can look for that. And so they feel better because they start getting a knowledge of the game. Right. And I've worked with players that had no clue about tennis, but were athletes. They may have been professional athletes at, the NBA, basketball, and so on. And it's like, you're still retraining them. They understand. I said, look, all I need you to do is look for this. Forget about what the racket face did. Forget about what the technique is. I don't need any of that stuff. Because at the end of the day, technique is great. Fundamentals are awesome. We need to have it. However, you have to figure out a way to make the shot. Everybody has different looking strokes. There's not one cookie cutter way that says this is the best way to do it. There is no magic pill. It's like some person might hit it like this, another person there. Our job as coaches is to use the stats to say, well, you do struggle really, really difficult on hitting a forehand approach shot down the line. Because when it is low and you try to go down the line, you pretty much miss 20% of the time. So we got to figure out how to fix that. Do we go a different direction? Do I teach you a different way to hit that shot? Do we use a different technique as far as slice, or do we get more risk? That's where the coaching for the technique comes into play.
Yeah.
Not because it's like, well, my kid's forehand return of serve was bad. It's like, no, it doesn't. And so the stats are funny because I have parents that do this and they bring it back, and I always will ask them, I said, well, how'd your kid's match go? Oh my God, it was so excruciating. Is that their forehand return is so bad. And they'll come back and tell me this, and they send me the stats. I start laughing, and I'm like going, you do realize that your kid did not lose the match because of the forehand return. I just want to make that really clear. And they go, well, it just really looked bad. I said, your kid missed 3. Out of the entire match, there was 84 points, but they missed 3. That did not lose them the match. They probably missed one at a crucial time. Don't get me wrong, but they did not lose the match. So I had a parent one time that would not chart, but I was able to watch the match live online. So I charted the match, and I watched the whole thing, charted the match, have all the stats. Didn't tell them I had the stats at all. I asked them further, I talked to the player. They sat there, they're very devastated. They lost this and that. And it's like, well, I can understand. I mean, didn't say a word. Say, hey, but I loved how you tried. I loved how your effort was. There were certain things that you did so well. Parents were like, oh my God, they just can't do this. They can't do that. I don't understand why they don't. And I'm like, okay, you got to stop right now. This is not doing any good, because if this is how you feel, I guarantee you that it's transferring over to your kid. And so your kid isn't going to improve. They're just going to get worse. And they're like, well, what do you think happened? I said, before I say that, just tell me what you think truly happened in this match. They gave me 3 things that were so far in left field that you may have well have watched a different match. Because I think there may have been 3 or 4 points that actually happened that way, but that was not what actually happened. I showed him the stats. I said, so you think her backhand's really that bad? Yeah, it was just horrible. Okay, she had 2 unforced errors on her backhand. She had 11 on her forehand. She had 5 forcing backhands. I said, I wish the girl would have played her backhand, for God's sake. We probably would have won the match. And they're like, oh, well, but I said, you focused on certain points. I get it. This is what parents do. We focus on a huge point, this, and or something that they were working on, and we're not capable of looking at it and going, hey, that's getting better. That's why stats are important, because you can go back and say, look, you know what, my return of serve percentage or my winning point percentage off the returns is way better today than it was 6 months ago. That gives a tool for the parents to say there is progression, also for the coach. Or is there
Right.
something to be, we have to tweak something a little bit. But I do feel like parents sometimes and coaches in particular, are very intimidated by stats.
Mhm. Why is that? I mean, I feel like, it would be such a simple thing for them to learn how to use and use effectively, especially in the coach parent piece of the triangle.
Sure.
It seems like it would be such a no-brainer for opening up lines of communication, again, giving the parents something useful to focus on during their kids' matches, alleviating or at least reducing the need for the coach to actually be at so many matches, but still get the knowledge that they would have gotten had they been sitting there. It just seems like such a missed opportunity.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a missed opportunity. I do think, however, there are a lot of coaches that can use that information, and they would, and use it in the best interest of, like, this is what we can do to improve the player. I do feel there's a lot of coaches that, I mean, look, I wouldn't have known what to do when I was younger. I mean, and I was a great player, and everybody could sit there and, well, he was this, he was that. I mean, he's God's gift to the world. His first player, look what he did. He won the Easter Bowl. I still didn't know what the heck I was doing.
Yeah.
But I learned along the way. I mean, there were certain things I knew how to do: game management, how to play a tournament, the art. I mean, which most people don't understand is, like, there's an art to winning a tournament.
Yeah.
You don't just show up to a tournament, but there's an art to it. It starts long before in how you show up. You just don't show up to a tournament and say, hey, I won. I think
That may need to be another podcast episode, Joey.
it could be. I think a lot of coaches get intimidated because they feel like they might be doing something wrong.
Hmm.
And a lot of times you have to go in a different direction to improve something. And they're afraid. I mean, I know for a fact, I mean, I've consulted, gone to different academies, talked with them and their coaches and their younger ones. And I say, look, you can't be afraid to fail. You just can't. You have to be willing to put it, like, the best interest of the kid to make them better. And if that's the case, sometimes to make that kid better, you have to break through something to get them uncomfortable, and it makes them worse. I said you have to figure out a way to do that so you don't destroy their confidence, but you have to do that. Or you can keep doing what you're doing, and they're going to be comfortable, but they're going to come to you in about 2 or 3 years, and they're going to sit there and say, well, why aren't I being this person?
Yeah.
It's like, well, because you wouldn't do anything that was uncomfortable. I do think coaches get very intimidated. They're a little bit insecure sometimes as far as, like, making changes. I mean, let's be honest. If there's a coach out there that's trying to coach every junior tennis player how to hit the exact same forehand, you're out of your mind. It's just that simple. I mean, nobody can teach the one forehand that's going to be the perfect forehand, because everybody's body is different.
Right.
So a kid's wrist might be this way, that way, their legs, whatever. There's so many intangibles that go on. Now, there are certain things that we can use from that and say, these are the parameters we want to be around. But to sit there and say, this is it, this is how Roger Federer hit his forehand, is like, well, great, you're not Roger.
Yeah.
I mean, so I see this a lot, and in lessons and so on. It's like, okay, but your kid can't return. It's pretty much proven that they can't hit a backhand return cross court. So how are you going to improve that? Sometimes it doesn't even take technique or fundamentals. It's just like, could you just hit the ball earlier and just aim over there?
Yeah.
Just hit it that way. And you tell the kid that, and they do it. It's like, okay, see, it's all solved.
Yeah.
It wasn't like any like magic that it was just like saying, hey, hit the ball earlier, it will go there. Okay, coach. So I wish more, I mean, the rest of the world uses this
Yes.
in all sports. And this is the crazy part. And this is what fear is. I'm very fearful as American. I love American sports. I love football. I love basketball. I love soccer. I love all this stuff. But I'm very fearful that we get to a point that we don't understand, like, how can we use the stats to help our players and not just sit there and make them one dimensional as like, well, this is how I coach and this is how it's going to be.
Yeah.
Because the stats will prove it and say, look, they got the ugliest forehand I've ever seen. But I got news for you. He don't miss it. So what do? I teach the kid, it's like, you can't hit a winner. Here's the deal. Don't hit a winner, but run your butt off every single time and just make it, because your backhand down the line is amazing.
Mm-hmm.
So just use it. So that's, I think that's how we can use it. And parents would start understanding that more. I do think the parent-coach relationship, I mean, I try to make it very clear. It's like, look, you're my eyes and ears when you're at a tournament. What helps me is if you bring me back stats.
Mm-hmm.
If you just coming back and tell me, it's like, well, they did really well. They played that. It's like, okay, could you be a little bit more, like, did their first serve look better? Was this? Stats at least let me know.
Yeah.
Is that, well, she served at 65% in this tournament. It's like, well, I'd like to have that number about 3 points higher. But I'm more is like, well, how many points did she win off of her first serve when she got it in? And I see that number at 75, 80. It's like, okay, now we're on something.
Right.
I think we don't use that enough. And coaches could use it as a benefit to, and quite honestly, instead of looking at it as a negative, look at it as like, this is a way to sit there and say, hey, we're on the right track. See what happens. They may not have won the match, but look at, these are the 3 main focus areas we just did. And look how much better they got.
Right.
It doesn't mean that they're going to win. I mean, they might win 2 years from now. But I do see a lot of parents and, I see it split where it's like, well, my kid's not winning, therefore I'm going to leave.
Right. Therefore, it's the coach's fault.
It's the coach's fault. It's like, well, the coach was actually doing the right thing to make your kid to have a chance to play at a Division I school and probably play in the top 3 of the lineup. But you want to go that direction, it's probably not going to work.
Mm-hmm. Well, and this all comes back to the whole communication piece, which, I talk about this in pretty much every podcast. And, parents have to be educated. We don't all come to junior tennis understanding player development, understanding athletic development, understanding the physical changes, the mental challenges of tennis. We don't all come with this knowledge. So, in my opinion, as a tennis parent who happened to grow up playing tennis, it's the coach's job to help us understand what the plan is here. And if the coach has a plan and then shares that plan with me as the parent and also with my child, then we're on to something. Then we've got a base and we can work forward from there. But if the coach, worst case scenario, doesn't have a plan at all, then to me, that's a red flag. Bye-bye, coach, because you can't even take the time to write out a developmental plan for the next 3 months. We need to understand where we're headed here. But also, if the coach has a plan, but doesn't communicate it to both the player and the parents, then there's a breakdown there. And the parents then tend to focus on the wrong thing. The players tend to focus on the wrong thing. And the coaches get frustrated because all of a sudden the parents want to leave because they don't understand what it is the coach is trying to do with their child because the coach hasn't communicated it. So it's this vicious cycle. And I think as parents, as the ones writing the check, it is fully within our rights and should be expected that we're going to ask a coach are you going to put together a developmental plan for my child? How often are we going to sit down and review it? And what is my role in helping my kid achieve the goal that he or she has set forth?
Absolutely. And my question I try to explain this to all parents, is you have to do your due diligence. You gotta look, there's always going to be coaches. There's always going to be, and they could be great. It doesn't, some of them are great. Some of them like, I don't know if that's going to work. If you go to a coach and every one of their kids wins at the 12s and 14s, and you come to find out by the time they're 16 or 18, they've either burned out or didn't get a college scholarship. In my opinion, that's a little bit of a red flag.
Yeah.
It's also is like, who have you worked with? What are the process? I have parents that come to me and I said, if you'd be more than happy, you can call any parent you want. They're going to tell you. And there's some that will sit there and say, he's a very tough coach. He's very hard, but he's fair.
Mm-hmm.
He's going to be a taskmaster. He's going to want excellence. He wants certain things a certain way. Whereas you could go to another place and another place is going to sit there and tell you how amazing you are. And then 3 years from now, you figure out like, well, what's going on? I think that the parents first of all, I already know this. The parents have to be involved. The parents have to be the glue that's going to be there. My father was involved with my coach, and my coach would set the plan, and then my father would follow it and learn from it, and where's the mistakes, and then offer advice. I want my parents to sit there and say, what do you think? I don't want to sit there and say, well, you're out of your mind. You've never played tennis. You were a hockey player. What do you know? If they can sit there and see something because they're watching something, it's like, you know what, that's something that could possibly work. Let's look into it. Mm-hmm. I think too many times what happens is that, and I hear from coaches, I hear from parents, it's like, well, they don't listen to me and they don't do this, or they don't want to do what I tell them to. It's like, okay, first of all, the parent's paying you. You're the coach. It is your job. You're not working in the NBA. You don't have that luxury. And by the way, even if you did, there's an owner of the NBA that sits there and pays for all those players. You don't get to make that choice to fire the player. You got to figure out how to make it work. Mm-hmm. A lot of times, I think we get caught up in, this is my way, this is the way it has to be. And it's like, well, there's different ways of approaching this. And that's where this disassociation with coaches and parents, and there's this triangle is like, well, who do I trust? And then the poor kid's in the middle of everything.
Right.
And then with the stats, it's the easiest part because you look at it and say, look, this is where you're getting better.
Yeah.
This is what we've been working on. This is clear cut. This is a number. Just like if you're going to school and you're taking a test and you are getting 95%, it's going to show you are on a rate of improvement.
Right.
Whereas if you lose a match, nobody knows what happened.
Yeah.
There could have been a bad call. There could have been too much wind. There's so many intangibles that go on, but right. All we focused on was like, oh my God. I see this. I catch players doing this all the time. It's like, oh my God, I can't believe they lost to this person. I said, do you even know what happened?
Yeah.
I said, let's be realistic. We don't know. Maybe that person had an amazing day. Maybe they had a terrible day. So stats are an incredible way for us to be able to put it all together. Mm-hmm. And be on one page.
Right. And again, it's a tangible piece of data that as parents, if we're questioning, is my kid actually getting better? Is all this money I'm spending on lessons and drills and travel to tournaments, is this leading anywhere? If we're tracking match performance through stats, whether it's racket stats or something else, we at least have something we can go back and say, oh my gosh, 3 months ago in this tournament, every single match, your serve percentage was between this range and this range. Now, all of a sudden, it's improved by 5 percentage points.
Sure.
this is huge, right?
Yeah.
And it helps the parents validate what they're doing and sacrificing for their child. It helps the child validate the sacrifices that they're making in order to keep getting better. And it helps the coach validate that, hey, all this time and money you're spending sending your kid to me is actually paying off.
Mhm.
And so why wouldn't you use it? You know,
Well,
to
I
me,
think a
it's a
lot of times,
no-brainer.
I think a lot of times parents don't, well, let's put it this way. Parents don't use it because they're a little bit intimidated by it. It's like, well, I don't want to do the wrong thing. I
Yeah.
got news for you. Just learn on the fly. Make the
Yeah.
mistakes and
It's
you'll
not
get
that
better at
hard.
it. It's not
And
that hard.
it's really not that hard.
And sometimes I think parents don't want to know what the truth is
Well, there you
because,
go.
they don't really accept the fact that it's like, well, my kid's backhand return really isn't that good. Oh, they did a great in this match. It's like, yeah, well, they played somebody that wasn't even close to the same level.
Mhm.
So I really feel that it's a great tool for parents to be able to be open about, to see, and quite honestly, I think it's great. I had it all throughout my childhood, and
Mhm.
it wasn't anywhere close to what it is today, obviously. And to be able to have discussions of like, well, this is what you did well, this is where you were failing, this is where we need to improve. I loved it as a player. It gave
Yeah.
me a sense of like, instead of being worried about, oh, did I win? Did I lose? I was be able to go out there and say, hey, did you see this? I mean, I won 91% of the points when I came to the net,
Right.
and
Even
my,
things like being able to close out games. I mean,
sure.
when you're up 40 love, how
Yeah.
many times were you able to close out that game?
Yeah.
And is that improving? That's a
Yeah.
testament to your mentality, your preparation, your ability to think on the fly and implement the things you've been working on. I mean, all of these things are so valuable, and especially building the confidence of the player too.
Sure.
And,
And
again,
that's where the
why
parent,
not use it?
yeah, and that's where the parent helps.
Yeah.
Because the parent can help them build the confidence. Because you can sit there and after a match is like, man, you fought your butt off. You did really well. You know what? These are wow, I can't believe how much better you've gotten at this. The sense of like a kid hearing that, even after they lost a match, is like, really? My backhand return got better? What do you think's going to happen? It's not going to get worse. It's going to get a lot better.
Yeah.
So I'm hoping, I really am, I'm crossing my fingers that we take a page out of what's happening around the world and we can understand with all the technology, everything we have, that we can use these tools to our advantage. Not just a video camera that sits there and shows the technique, and then you come back and it's like, well, see, this is the angle, this is why it's wrong. It's like, I got news for you. It doesn't really matter. Did the ball go in? Did it go cross court? And did they win the point? Because it just doesn't matter. It's like the strategy. It's how you manage a match. That's what stats can help show, not just like, well, your forehand's breaking down. I mean, we all know that. I mean, it doesn't take a genius to figure that out, and we can fix that.
Right. Well, Joey, thank you so much. This was really eye-opening and enlightening, and I love hearing your passion for this, and I hope that it comes out and that any coaches that are watching or listening to this will say, oh, you know what? I need to start incorporating this into my training situations. And there's so many great stats apps out there now, and we've featured a lot of them on this podcast. So I'm not going to start naming names here. Go through our archives and you'll find them. But whatever one works for you and feels easy for you to use, that's the right one.
Sure.
And sure, it would be great if every coach would pick one and then have all their parents use the same one, because that would make life easy. But even if that's not happening, if it's the parent saying, oh, I've got this app, I'm going to use it. Coaches, take a few minutes, learn how to analyze the data that the parents are supplying to you, because that's how we all work together to help these kids reach their highest level in our game.
Well, that's absolutely perfect. I can't thank you enough for having me out here. And I really do hope that parents and coaches can listen from this, because you have an amazing forum that can really help, what tennis could become something incredibly special in this country. And I hope people will listen and take this to heart of like, hey, it might be worth something to try.
Yeah, love that. Joey, if people want to reach you, what's the best way for them to do that?
They can just look at joeyblaketennis.com. And also with the foundation is spinmastersportsfoundation.com.
Okay, awesome. And again, we'll have those links. Joey's pretty active on Facebook too, I think, right? That's kind of your forum of choice.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah,
my wife keeps me on there with all of her family from Brazil. So
I love it. Well, we'll have a link to your Facebook profile as well if people want to follow you there. And that'd be awesome. I really appreciate you taking time out
thank you
to share. Yeah, it's been great to talk with you. And to my audience, thank you all so much for tuning in. We will catch you next time on Parenting Aces.